We're the Wild Center, this is Lunchtime Live. We're talking about nature and exciting wildlife. Encounters with otters and owls too. From Tupper Lake right to you. Learn about the plants and trees. There's so much to explore and see. Lunchtime Live, it's time to start the show. From the Wild Center, here we go.
Hey everyone, I'm Kayleigh, and for this week's Nature Lab, we're going to be talking about the forest detective work that is tree identification. So identifying trees is a puzzle, but with all the right tips and tricks in your mental toolbox, you can sort of piece together the puzzle of what kind of tree you're looking at. So today our activity sheet is an identification sheet, so I'll give you a second to click on the link in the comments if you want to pull it up, and then I'm going to be going over it with you guys today as the lesson goes. So I'm going to be going over some of the trees listed on this sheet, and I'll help you figure out which pieces you need and how to kind of look at them so you can infer which type of tree you're looking at. And then at the end, hopefully you can get outside and try to identify some trees maybe around your neighborhood. So before we start looking at the sheet, I'm actually going to go over a few of the main puzzle pieces that I find helpful to look at when I'm trying to identify trees. All right, so the first clue I'm going to be talking about is cones or seed-bearing fruit. So if you've ever enjoyed an apple, a lemon, or really any other type of fruit, then you are probably pretty familiar with deciduous seed-bearing fruits. But fruit aren't the only vessels that trees use to store seeds. For example, ash trees keep their seeds in these little pods that are called sumaras, and then sycamore trees will keep their seeds in those fuzzy little balls that are also called sumaras, and sometimes they're spiky, and you can always find those sort of rolling around in the fall time. Conifers, on the other hand, store their seeds in cones. So different species and genus of conifers produce pretty distinctive cones. Hemlocks, for example, produce cones that are super small, like as small as a fingernail, whereas sugar pines will produce cones that can be as long as your forearm. All right, so the next clue that we're going to be talking about today is leaves and needles. So deciduous trees have leaves, and then they're the ones that drop those leaves to get ready for winter. So if you live here in the Northeast, those are the ones that create those sort of big magical fall colors. If the tree that you're trying to identify has leaves on it, then you can use those as a pretty big clue for what you're looking for. So, for example, maple trees have those big sort of three-pronged leaves, and then oaks are pronged too, but they're sort of longer, and then they have more prongs on them. And then, for example, aspens will have little circular leaves, and then they're bright green in the springtime, and then they get darker as the year goes on. Conifers have either needles or scales. So these are sometimes called evergreen trees, because they keep those needles or scales year-round. An exception to this would be the larch tree, which we have here in the Northeast, and they actually drop their needles to get ready for winter, and they turn bright yellow in the fall time. Conifer needles either grow straight off the branch, like in spruces and hemlocks, or they grow in little bunches, which are also called fascicles, like on pines. The shape of the needles, their arrangements on the branches, the number of them in each bundle, or what color they are all super helpful to note when you're trying to identify a tree. The other types of conifer leaves, which are called scales, are pretty distinctive. Up here in northern New York, you can find scales on cedar trees, but they also occur on the famed redwoods of the Northern California coastline, and then also in the dry Southwest on juniper trees. So next, we're going to talk about bark. So bark is a super important thing to notice, although it's not usually enough to reliably identify a tree just based on the color of it, but there are a lot of other clues you can look at that are going to help you. So for example, birch trees have very distinctive white bark, but aspen trees also have white bark. So noting the bark can sort of help you narrow it down, but you're going to need to look at some other clues to determine if it's an aspen or a birch tree. Besides color, the texture of bark is also really helpful to note. So in some trees, they have this sort of thick, furrowed bark, for example, on pines. And then on balsam firs, the bark is very smooth, and then it has sort of like pimples on it. On birch trees, a lot of times the bark can be really papery, and then some trees too will have sort of peeling bark. So all of those things are really important to note. So the last clue that we're going to talk about before we get going and look for some trees is location. So basically, once you start sort of learning what to look for and getting better at identifying trees, you're going to get pretty good at noticing the physical features that you can find. The final clue that I will leave you guys with before we start this week's activity is this. Notice where you're at. The ecosystem that you're in and then also the region that you're in are super big clues for what type of tree that you're looking at. For example, bog spruces and birches like to live in swampy areas or kind of near water. Bristlecone pines live super high up on the mountains, above the tree line for a lot of other species. Sugar maples will live in the Northeast, but sugar pines live in the Sierras in Central California. Background knowledge about the ecosystem and the history of the area that you're in are super useful for identifying stuff down to the species level. And it's pretty fun to learn about when you get to a new place. So I'm gonna head out and get exploring and look for some of the trees on those sheets. So I will point out some of their distinctive features, and then you can look at the sheet and try to determine which type of tree we're looking at. So let's go exploring. All right, so what are we looking at here? So the stem of this tree is one of the trees that's going to be on your worksheet that you have in front of you right now. So I'm going to take you through looking through the clue of bark. So for this tree, I mean, the first thing that you really notice is the color. Looking closely at it, it's white, and then also there are spots where it's peeling off. So little bits of this sort of papery, thin, soft material are peeling off. Besides that, in the spots that it's not white, I noticed that it's really dark. And the darkness to me, it kind of looks closer to black than gray. So you can see these like dark striations, and then the white bark, and then the thin, papery stuff that's kind of peeling off of it. All right, so the next thing that I'm going to be looking at here is the leaves. So this tree, I'll just tilt you up real quick. As you can see, currently does not have any. That's kind of the season right now. There's a little snow on the ground, no leaves on the trees. If you're in a spot where there isn't too much snow, a good clue is you can look around and find some of the leaves that have fallen off the tree that are right here on the ground. So this leaf right here, right now it's brown, but you can note the shape of it. So the color is not going to be super helpful now, but you can see the shape. It's circular and then pointed at the top. If you're in a spot where there's too much snow and you can't find the leaves on the ground, sometimes you're just going to have to do with the bark and the shape of the tree. So this tree, it's really tall, no leaves, so it's deciduous, and it's got that white bark. Okay, so as you can see here, I'm standing here with a very different looking tree. So this one, looking at the bark, this bark to me is more gray than brown. It is kind of flaky, but I wouldn't call it corn flaky, just a little bit. And another big clue, I'm going to get you a little closer here. So lower down, where the bark is older, you can see it has these deep furrows, or at least the beginning of them. So those furrows are definitely important to note for this one. And then looking up at this guy, I'll tilt you up so you can see a little better. So looking straight up, he has needles. So needles are a clear indicator this is going to be a coniferous tree, or a conifer that keeps its needles in the wintertime. And to me, these needles look very long and feathery. I can see that they're clumped together, and the clumps look like it looks like a good amount of needles per bundle to me. And then the needles are pretty long, and they're sort of bluish. And then, like I said earlier, they definitely are looking a little feathery. All right, so if you're referring to your worksheet right now, so we're looking at this tree right here. His branches don't start until you get a lot higher up on the tree. And then those needles are looking kind of long and feathery, light green, almost bluish to me. And then it's got, especially on the older parts of the tree, that sort of gray furrowed bark. So looking at your worksheet and using the clues that we've talked about so far, what type of tree do you think this is? If becoming a forest detective was something that you enjoyed or something that you are interested in learning more about, I would definitely recommend picking up a field guide or getting pretty familiar with what to type into the internet to help you research stuff. I love getting new field guides. I get them as often as I can, and often when I go to a new place. If you can't get your own field guide, you can also try taking pictures of all the different things on the trees that you noticed, and then whenever you get home, you can use those pictures to type stuff into the internet, and then you can identify trees that way. Anyways, I hope that everyone enjoyed learning about tree identification as much as I enjoyed talking about it. We have another supplemental worksheet also in the comment section of this video, so you can use that, and you yourself can get outside and try to identify some trees. You can use that worksheet to sort of narrow down what you're looking at, and then you can use those clues either in a field guide or on the internet to try to find out what sort of tree that you're looking at. All right, well, I hope everyone has a good rest of your day and you enjoyed this week's Nature Lab.